Hello, welcome to the Spirit of Apollo Lunar Lander. This is the final episode in this series, and I've titled it, How Will We Get Back? First of all, because we're going to talk about how the astronauts used the ascent stage of the lunar lander to get off the surface of the moon, and then how they proceeded back to the Earth. But also, we're going to talk about the efforts that are underway as we speak to return human beings to the surface of the moon in the very near future. First, let's take a look at how I constructed the ascent stage of the lunar module using the contents of Bag 4. Bag 4 does complete the model. I assembled the complete model for episode 3 so we could see how the entire lunar module was used during surface operations. But now I can point out some of the features of the ascent stage, which is what Bag 4 was about. Just like in the real lunar module, the ascent stage does come off, and that's actually how the astronauts took off from the moon here. The ascent stage, ascent engine would fire, and the astronauts would then lift off in just the ascent stage. The ascent stage does show some other important features of the lunar module. It has these 4 sets of reaction control system thrusters. Those are important for doing the rendezvous operations, but also for adjusting the orbit once the ascent stage got back up into orbit. In our previous episode, we discussed the surface activities for Apollo 11 specifically. After their EVA activities were concluded, it was time to pack up, get ready to go home. In addition to packing up everything that they needed to take with them, they would leave behind everything that they could in order to save weight, and I do mean everything. One of the last things they would leave behind would be their PLSS life support backpacks. In addition to leaving behind items that constituted unnecessary weight, the Apollo astronauts would often leave behind symbolic items. On Apollo 11, these symbolic items included a mission patch from the Apollo 1 mission commemorating the astronauts who were killed preparing for that mission, as well as items commemorating 2 cosmonauts who were killed in accidents. There was also a 1.5-inch silicon disc that had etched messages of goodwill from 4 U.S. presidents, other dignitaries, and representatives of 73 other countries. After the astronauts were safely on board the lunar module again, they were scheduled to have a sleep period. Neither of them slept very well, they would report later, as can be imagined. So, after spending about 21 hours and 36 minutes on the moon's surface, they were ready to launch into orbit again. We don't have exterior video of the Apollo 11 ascent launch. However, on Apollo 17, a camera mounted on the lunar rover was able to capture the launch of the ascent stage.
99, proceeded, 3, 2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector are good. Ag thought. Pitch over. Roger, you have good thrust.
On the Apollo 11 mission, at 124 hours and 22 minutes of mission elapsed time, the astronauts fired the ascent stage engine for about 435 seconds, putting the ascent stage in an elliptical orbit with an apoloon, that is the farthest away from the surface of the moon, of 55 miles, and a paraboloon, that is the closest they were to the moon, of 11 miles. Subsequently, they fired the reaction control thrusters to get the craft into a approximately circular orbit of 56 miles. Subsequent firing of the RCS thrusters would put the ascent stage into a 57 mile by 72 mile elliptical orbit, allowing it to dock with the command module. After the two craft rendezvoused, the lunar module docked with the command module. Then the cargo from the lunar module was transferred into the command module, and the astronauts transferred over as well. And then once everything was safe and secure, the vehicles undocked and the lunar module was jettisoned. At this point, then, the astronauts were ready to head for home. As I said, this video is called How Will We Get Back? Not only because it discusses how the astronauts return to the Earth from the surface of the moon, but also because it gives us a chance to talk a little bit about plans to return human beings to the moon in the very near future. One of the problems with discussing these plans is that they are subject to change. For example, until quite recently, the idea was to put a space station around the moon first. This space station, known as the Lunar Gateway, was going to be in a highly eccentric orbit. This so-called near rectilinear halo orbit would be as close as 1,500 kilometers from the moon, or as far as 70,000 kilometers away from the moon. This distant orbit would be easier for an Orion spacecraft to reach than a lower orbit. Remember, a lower orbit is like going down into a well. You still have to climb back out of the well. So the idea was that the Orion would meet up with a spacecraft there at the Lunar Gateway, and that spacecraft would then take the astronauts down to the surface of the moon and back up again. As of now, the Lunar Gateway has been canceled. However, there are two companies that were contracted to build human landing systems that would meet the Orion spacecraft at the Gateway, and the concept of landing astronauts on the moon appears to be that they will just meet up in a high orbit without having a lunar gateway there. One of the companies with a contract to build a human landing system is SpaceX. Their human landing system will be built around an upper stage of their Starship rocket. In order to get the upper stage to the moon, it's going to have to be refueled in Earth orbit. And to do that, it will require a number of Starship launches to bring fuel to a refueling station in Earth orbit. As you can see, the Starship upper stage is quite a bit larger than the Apollo era lunar module. The idea is not to just have a flag and footprints mission, but to actually have a system that can deliver significant infrastructure to the surface of the moon as well. The other company with a contract to build a human landing system is Blue Origin. They first planned to build a cargo landing system called Blue Moon Mark I, and then have a human landing system called Blue Moon Mark II. Their concept involves using transfer rockets to get the lander to the lunar orbit. Those transfer rockets will also require on-orbit refueling, but probably not as many refueling rockets because it is a smaller lander than the Starship upper stage. Last month, NASA redesignated Artemis 3 from a landing mission to an Earth orbit test mission for one or both of these landing systems. And then Artemis 4 became the first human landing mission. Keep watching the news because any of this may change at any time. With the success of the Artemis mission, it is safe to say that momentum is building for a return of human beings to the surface of the moon in the near future. And it would be foolish to deny that the motivation of NASA and its associated agencies to put human beings on the moon in the very near future has been aided by the fact that the Chinese National Space Agency also plans to put human beings on the moon by 2030. But I hope this doesn't evolve into just another space race, because that kind of motivation is fleeting. I hope we have finally understood that exploring our nearest neighbor will provide enormous benefits to all humanity. If you want to know more about the Apollo missions, please check out my series of the Spirit of Apollo. And if you want to know a little bit about the current Artemis mission, please check out my Spirit of Artemis video series, which I'm going to complete tomorrow when Artemis returns to the Earth. Until then, Godspeed.